By 39, Ethan Cole had everything: money, fame, power. But no one ever asked why a man with it all spent his nights staring at the ceiling, wide awake, choking on a silence that no amount of success could fill. The night he saw 3 boys huddled around a trash fire changed nothing about his status. But it changed everything about his soul. Ethan Cole had everything a man was supposed to want. At 39, he was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar tech empire, the kind of company that shaped the future. His face had graced the cover of Fortune, Forbes, and every other magazine that worshipped genius and wealth. His hair was always perfectly styled, his tailored suits cost more than most people's monthly rent, and his smile, calculated, camera-ready, never faltered in front of the world. But behind the tinted windows of his blacked-out SUV, behind the penthouse glass that looked out over the San Francisco skyline, Ethan Cole was a man hollowed out from the inside. He woke up each morning in silence. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort but claws. No footsteps down the hall. No laughter. Just the low hum of smart devices, the mechanical sweep of blinds opening to a city that meant nothing to him anymore. His assistants worshipped him, investors feared him, and competitors envied him. But not one person truly knew him. That suited Ethan just fine, or at least that's what he told himself. Success, he had discovered, was an excellent distraction. For a while. It drowned out the memories. The ones of his mother curled up on the floor, shaking from withdrawal. The sound of sirens. The nights he went to bed hungry, the car's ceiling above him, sagging and stained. He buried that child under layers of luxury and logic. But some ghosts don't stay buried. Late at night, when the parties ended and the lights dimmed, Ethan would sit on his rooftop terrace with a glass of something expensive and stare at the stars, wondering how the hell he still felt so cold. He had built everything from the ground up, his company, his image, his fortune. And yet, there was a weight in his chest he couldn't shake. Something nameless and heavy, like a locked door deep inside that he'd forgotten how to open. His therapist once asked him when he last felt joy. Not excitement. Not accomplishment. Joy. Ethan didn't have an answer. People thought power was intoxicating. And it was, for a time. But eventually, it just became another routine. Just another game to win. The boardroom victories, the viral speeches, the standing ovations, they were all hollow echoes in a room that never filled. That December night, when everything began to shift, Ethan wasn't planning to stop. He was being driven home after another gala, another photo op with people he didn't care about, in a tuxedo that felt like a costume. But something in him, some instinct, some forgotten human itch, told him to take a walk. He asked the driver to pull over near the old train station, a part of the city that had been left behind, much like everything else Ethan had tried to forget. The air was cold, sharp enough to sting the lungs. His polished shoes clicked against the cracked pavement as he walked, hands deep in his coat pockets. And then, he saw them. 3 small figures, curled up against the side of a burned-out convenience store. They were bundled in tattered jackets, leaning into each other for warmth. A faint orange glow flickered near them, a makeshift fire in a rusted can. One of the boys looked up, just for a second. Big eyes. Hollow cheeks. Maybe 7 years old. Ethan's steps slowed. His breath caught. Something twisted in his chest, something ancient and raw. He stood there, frozen, watching them. They didn't move. Didn't ask for help. Didn't beg. They just existed. Like this was normal. Like this was life. Ethan turned and walked back to the car, his face unreadable. But something had cracked. And that crack was about to change everything. The next morning, Ethan Cole sat at the long glass dining table in his penthouse, a steaming cup of black coffee untouched in front of him. The city buzzed far below, but the sound couldn't reach him. Everything inside his home was too quiet, too pristine, like a museum curated for someone who never truly lived there. He stared at the skyline, but all he saw were those three boys, curled into each other beside that rusted barrel of fire. The way the smallest one trembled. The way the oldest tried to pull his arms around the others, like he could shield them from the cold and the world all at once. It wasn't pity Ethan felt. It was recognition. He didn't speak of it during his morning briefing. Didn't bring it up while his assistant listed investor updates and board expectations. He sat through every meeting, nodded at all the right moments, but the echo of those children's eyes followed him like a shadow. They had been silent, but somehow louder than anything else in his day. By late afternoon, he couldn't take it anymore. He cancelled a dinner with a major VC and told his driver to take him back to the station. No security detail. No press. Just him. The sun was dipping low by the time he arrived, casting long shadows over the cracked concrete and graffiti-tagged walls. He didn't know what he expected. Maybe that they'd be gone. Maybe that it had all been a product of a tired mind and too many ghosts. But they were still there. All three. In the exact same place, like time hadn't moved for them at all. This time, he didn't just stand there. He walked toward them slowly, careful not to startle them. The middle boy noticed him first and gave a nudge to the others. They all looked up in unison, wary, as if they were preparing to run. Ethan stopped a few feet away and crouched down to their level, keeping his hands visible. He didn't say anything right away. He didn't have the words. So instead, he opened the bag he brought and took out a simple brown paper sack. Inside was warm food, sandwiches, fruit, bottled water. Nothing fancy. Just enough to say, "I saw you." He placed the bag on the ground and gently slid it toward them. They didn't move. He didn't press them. After a few long moments, the oldest boy reached out and grabbed the sack. He didn't thank Ethan. He didn't smile. But he didn't run, either. That was enough. Ethan stood up, backed away, and sat on a broken bench across the street. He didn't watch them directly, just sat there in the cold for almost an hour. When he glanced over again, the boys were eating. Still huddled together, still silent. But eating. And alive. He returned the next day. And the day after. He brought more food. Blankets. Socks. He never asked questions. Never forced a conversation. He just kept showing up, each day stripping a little more of the executive armor he wore like a second skin. Something inside him began to shift, something slow, something cautious, but something very real. By the fourth day, the oldest boy spoke. "What do you want?" Ethan blinked. The voice was small, roughened by cold and maybe by distrust. But it wasn't hostile. It was tired. And honest. "I don't want anything," Ethan said after a moment. "Just, maybe you could use some help." The boy looked at him for a long time. Then turned his eyes back to the fire. "My name's Aiden," he muttered. "That's Jasper. And Leo." He didn't offer a last name. Ethan didn't ask. He only nodded, heart thudding louder than it had in years. For the first time in a long time, Ethan Cole didn't feel like a ghost walking through his own life. He felt present. Awake. And whether he knew it yet or not, he had just stepped across a line he could never uncross. It didn't take long for the rhythm to form. Each day, Ethan would arrive at the same time, just before sunset, carrying something in his hands, food, clean clothes, small things he remembered needing when he was a kid with no one looking out for him. And each day, the boys began to meet him a little closer, speak a little more, trust just enough to let him stay longer. It wasn't fast. It wasn't simple. But it was real. The more time he spent with them, the clearer the picture became. Aiden was the one who always positioned himself in front. He watched Ethan with quiet, calculating eyes that seemed far older than 7. He didn't smile easily, but he listened. Jasper spoke rarely, usually through nods or short, clipped phrases, but he was always observing. And Leo was different. He had a softness in his face that the streets hadn't yet hardened, a kind of hope that hadn't been beaten out of him. He smiled once at Ethan when he brought them hot chocolate, and Ethan felt something stir in his chest that he didn't have a name for. One evening, as they sat near a broken-down bus stop, the boys began to talk more freely, sharing pieces of themselves in fragments, like puzzle pieces scattered across the sidewalk. Aiden mentioned their mother for the first time, not by name, but as she. Said she got sick in a shelter. Said there was a fire. Said she didn't make it. After that, no one came. No one asked where they'd go. And eventually, the people around them just stopped looking at them at all. They told Ethan they'd been sleeping in alleys, behind dumpsters, in stairwells when they could find one. They didn't trust shelters. Too many bad people. Too many fights. One of them had almost been taken once. Jasper didn't say a word for a week after that. Since then, Aiden kept them close. Always. He knew how to disappear. How to make them invisible. Ethan listened, not as a CEO, not as someone with an agenda, but as a man who once knew what it felt like to be forgotten. He didn't offer false promises or pity. He just stayed. Something about the way the boys moved together got to him. They weren't just surviving, they were protecting one another with everything they had. It was instinctual, unspoken. When Aiden handed Leo the bigger half of a sandwich, when Jasper pulled his sleeve over Leo's hand to keep it warm, when they fell asleep piled on top of each other like puppies in a nest, Ethan felt the weight of their love. It was stronger than anything he had seen in any boardroom ordeal. And he began to realize something else: he was starting to care. Not in the abstract, not as a donor or a good Samaritan, but personally. Deeply. These boys were slipping into his heart with each passing day, and it terrified him. Because caring meant risk. Caring meant responsibility. And Ethan Cole, for all his wealth, had never truly let himself be responsible for another human being. Not like this. He found himself waking up in the middle of the night, wondering if they were warm enough. He stopped answering calls during dinner hours, just so he could spend more time with them. He began carrying their names in his chest like a quiet prayer, as if saying them out loud might anchor them more firmly in his life. And then came the night Leo fell asleep with his head in Ethan's lap. No words. No permission asked. Just a tired little boy, surrendering to safety he hadn't known in years. Ethan sat there, still as stone, watching the firelight flicker over the cracked pavement, one hand resting lightly on Leo's back. He didn't move for over an hour. That night, he didn't go back to the penthouse. He sat in his car, engine off, and stared out at the empty road. Something was breaking open inside him. Something old and aching and necessary. And though he didn't say it out loud, Ethan Cole already knew. He couldn't walk away from them. Not now. Not ever. It started with whispers in the executive wing. People noticed the changes before Ethan even acknowledged them himself. He began showing up late to meetings, distracted, with a look in his eyes that no one could quite place. The man who used to dominate every room with precision and focus now seemed preoccupied, half present, as if some part of him had already stepped into another life. Board members exchanged glances behind his back. His assistant, Monica, asked if he was okay more than once. He always said he was fine. He wasn't lying. He just didn't know how to explain that for the first time in years, he was thinking about someone other than himself. One morning, he sat in his office, staring at a performance report he didn't care about. Aiden's voice kept echoing in his mind from the night before: "We don't go to shelters. They split you up." That single sentence had haunted him, because it was filled with a kind of fear and experience no 7-year-old should have. Jasper had flinched when a security guard walked too close. Leo had asked if Ethan was going to leave, like the last man who said he'd help. Those words were heavier than any financial projection or market shift. He began making calls. Quietly at first. A friend at the Department of Social Services, a lawyer he trusted, a doctor who owed him a favor. He wanted to find a legal path forward. Custody. Protection. Anything that could make this real. But bureaucracy doesn't care about good intentions. It moves like molasses, especially for people without papers, without clean histories, without convenient origins. The boys had no known relatives, no birth certificates on file. They were ghosts in the system, untraceable and, in the eyes of the state, disposable. When word got out that Ethan Cole, one of the most powerful men in Silicon Valley, was trying to take custody of 3 homeless children, the reaction was swift and brutal. The media latched onto it like sharks in bloodied water. Headlines ranged from concern to scandalous: tech titans midlife crisis? Billionaire street kids, charity or cover-up? News crews started camping outside his building. Investors called emergency meetings. His board was livid. "You've compromised the company's image," one director snapped during a tense video call. "Your actions are becoming a liability." Ethan sat there, listening, his face calm but unreadable. Liability. That was the word they used. As if compassion was a breach of contract. As if children were a scandal. He was given an ultimatum. Step back from the situation. Let public relations manage it. Distance himself. Focus on his duties. Be the man they had built their empire around. Not some savior on a sidewalk. Not some reckless father figure chasing ghosts. He didn't sleep that night. He sat on the edge of his bed, the city glowing dimly beyond the windows, and thought about all the things he'd built. All the deals, the speeches, the launches, the relentless pursuit of progress. And yet, none of it had ever filled the silence inside him. None of it had given him what sitting beside 3 boys beside a fire had. Connection. Meaning. Purpose. By morning, the decision was made. He called a press conference. The room was packed with reporters, cameras flashing, microphones extended like claws. Ethan stepped up to the podium in a simple sweater, no suit, no tie. Just a man who had made up his mind. "I've spent most of my life chasing numbers," he began. "I've built things that changed the world. But I forgot how to feel anything real. Until I met 3 kids who reminded me what it means to care about someone more than yourself." The room fell still. "I'm stepping down as CEO, effective immediately. I'm not retiring. I'm choosing something better." Reporters erupted. Questions flew. He didn't answer them. He walked out, straight to his car, straight back to that corner of the city that no one wanted to see. Where 3 boys waited, unaware that a man had just given up an empire for the chance to keep a promise. He arrived with nothing but his jacket and a small smile. "We're going home," he said. The boys didn't ask questions. They just followed. The house wasn't a mansion. It wasn't perched on a cliff or hidden behind gates. It wasn't the kind of place you'd see in magazines or luxury listings, and Ethan liked it that way. It was a 2-story craftsman home tucked into a quiet neighborhood outside the city, with a wraparound porch, creaky wood floors, and a backyard that smelled of pine and old earth. It was the kind of place made for living, not for showing off. And for the first time in his life, Ethan bought something not because it was impressive, but because it felt safe. The boys stepped inside cautiously, their steps hesitant, eyes darting around like they were waiting for the trap to snap shut. The living room was warm, with soft light and the faint scent of something baking. Ethan had burned 2 attempts at frozen cookies earlier but refused to give up. There were blankets on the couch, shelves filled with books, a big table they could all eat at together. Upstairs, 3 rooms had been prepared, each one different, one with a space theme, another with walls covered in maps and stars, and the last with soft, calming colors and shelves filled with picture books and crayons. Ethan had picked each thing himself, learning what he could from their conversations and from what little they let slip about the things they missed. But the boys didn't run into their rooms. They didn't tear open drawers or bounce on beds. They just stood there, huddled near the door, as if they expected someone to come yelling, to tell them it was a mistake, that they didn't belong here. Leo clutched the sleeve of Aiden's jacket. Jasper kept glancing at the windows, like he was already planning an exit. Ethan didn't push them. He just knelt down in front of them and said, very softly, "No one's going to take this from you. Not now. Not ever." They didn't respond. But they didn't run either. That night, all 3 curled up together on the floor of the smallest room, the one Ethan had designed for Leo. Blankets wrapped tight around them, eyes wide open even in the dark. Ethan sat in the hallway, leaning against the wall outside their door, listening. He didn't leave. Not when his back ached. Not when his phone buzzed with missed calls and emails from the outside world. He stayed. Days passed. Then a week. And slowly, the walls between them began to crack. Aiden started asking questions. Jasper began sitting beside Ethan at breakfast, though he still didn't say much. Leo, sweet Leo, began humming to himself again, especially when Ethan cooked pancakes, which he did badly, but enthusiastically. The house became a rhythm, full of quiet sounds, footsteps on stairs, laughter from the backyard, the buzz of cartoons on Saturday mornings, the scrape of crayons on paper. Ethan had never known how much noise a home could hold. And he had never realized how beautiful that noise could be. He started reading to them at night. At first, they only listened from across the room. Then from the edge of the bed. Eventually, they all curled up around him, one by one, like puzzle pieces falling into place. The first time Jasper reached for Ethan's hand, it was so subtle he almost missed it. A light tug. A silent trust. Ethan held it like it was made of glass. One night, Leo fell asleep on Ethan's chest, breathing softly, fingers clutching the fabric of his shirt. Aiden whispered from the doorway, voice almost too quiet to hear, "You're not like the others." Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat was too tight. By the end of the second week, Leo began calling him Dad. Not every time. Not in public. But in those quiet, sacred moments when no one else was listening. The first time it happened, Ethan froze. Then, without even thinking, he whispered back, "Yeah, buddy?" The word settled into him like a key turning in a long-forgotten lock. It wasn't all easy. There were nightmares, moments of panic, sudden withdrawals. Aiden still checked the locks on the doors 3 times before bed. Jasper didn't like strangers, not even the kind delivery man who brought groceries. Leo sometimes cried for no reason and didn't know why. But they weren't surviving anymore. They were healing. Together. And for the first time since he was a boy himself, Ethan didn't feel like he was waiting for something to begin. He was already living it. He didn't need stock charts or quarterly goals or applause from a stage. He had warm mornings, and sticky pancake fingers, and 3 boys who slowly, quietly, started to believe they were safe. He wasn't building an empire anymore. He was building a family. The calm didn't last. It never does, not completely, not when something this good is built on ground that once shattered beneath you. It began with a knock on the door that came too early on a Saturday morning, the kind that made Ethan's stomach twist before he even reached the hallway. The boys were upstairs, still in pajamas, watching cartoons with half-eaten bowls of cereal. He opened the door expecting a package. Instead, he found a woman standing on the porch, arms crossed, eyes sharp and unapologetic. Her voice was smooth, too smooth, rehearsed like a speech she'd delivered 100 times. She introduced herself as Carla, said she was the boy's maternal grandmother. Said she'd only just heard about what happened, and she'd come to take them back where they belonged. Her tone was flat, like it was a legal transaction. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Ethan stood there, stunned, unsure what he was even hearing. The boys had never mentioned a grandmother. He asked for proof. She handed him a folder with a few birth records, her ID, and a lawyer's letter, already typed and waiting. Ethan didn't invite her in. Instead, he closed the door slowly, locking it behind him, heart pounding. He went straight to Aiden, who paused the show as soon as he saw Ethan's face. Ethan asked, carefully, if they knew a woman named Carla. The answer came too quickly. Aiden said, "She used to scream at Mom. She tried to take us once. After the fire, she disappeared." That was all Ethan needed to hear. By Monday, a legal storm had rolled in. Carla had filed for emergency custody, claiming Ethan had no right to harbor the children. That was the word they used, harbor. Like they were fugitives, not three scared boys who finally had warm beds and someone who kissed them goodnight. Ethan's lawyers got involved immediately, but even they seemed nervous. Carla had paperwork, blood relation, and the law tends to favor biology over bond. The boys could feel the shift before anything was said. Aiden became colder, more protective. Jasper stopped eating again. Leo began wetting the bed, too ashamed to tell anyone. They sensed that the world outside the house was trying to reach in and rip everything away. And Ethan, he felt powerless for the first time in years. No amount of money or influence could guarantee safety. Not yet. Then came the court date. It was raining that day, hard and cold, like the sky itself was warning him. The courtroom was full of eyes, lawyers, social workers, a judge with deep lines on his face and a tired look that made Ethan wonder how many broken families he'd seen in his life. Carla sat smugly with her attorney, dressed in muted gray, playing the part of a concerned grandmother. She talked about stability, about blood ties, about Ethan's inexperience with children and his questionable motivations. She painted herself as the only logical guardian. Ethan didn't give a speech. He didn't cry. He simply spoke the truth. He told the court how he'd found them. How no one came for them. How they huddled together in fear and silence, and how he didn't walk away. He spoke about Leo falling asleep on his chest, about Jasper's quiet bravery, about Aiden's sharp mind and heavy heart. He didn't describe them like they were burdens or charity projects. He described them like they were his sons. Because they were. The judge listened. And then, to everyone's surprise, he asked if the children would like to speak. Ethan hesitated. But Aiden stood up before anyone could stop him. His voice was small, but steady. "If you send us with her," he said, nodding toward Carla, "we'll run away again." The room went silent. "She doesn't want us. She just wants what comes with us." But Aiden turned to look at Ethan, "He chose us. He didn't have to. He just did." Leo started crying. Jasper took his hand. And in that moment, it was painfully, beautifully clear, this wasn't about legality. It was about love. The judge looked down at his papers for a long time. Then, without much ceremony, he ruled in Ethan's favor. Full guardianship was granted, effective immediately. Carla stormed out before the final words were spoken. Ethan didn't move at first. He just sat there, stunned, hands trembling slightly in his lap. Then Leo ran into his arms. Jasper followed. Aiden hung back for a second, eyes wide and wet, before walking over slowly. He didn't say anything, just leaned in and let Ethan hold him too. That night, they celebrated with pizza, apple juice, and pillows thrown all over the living room floor. They stayed up too late, laughed too hard, and for the first time in a long time, they didn't feel like they were waiting for something to go wrong. They were safe. They were family. And no one could take that away. Not now. Not ever again. Summer came slowly that year, like the world had finally decided to take a breath. The air was warmer, the days longer, and the house that once echoed with uncertainty now pulsed with life. Every window was open, every door left ajar, as if the house itself had grown confident in its purpose. It no longer felt like a shelter or a temporary stop. It was a home. And in that home, something remarkable had started to bloom: freedom. Aiden, always the protector, had slowly allowed himself to just be a kid. He took over the garage, building things from scraps and leftover wood: birdhouses, broken radios turned into speakers, an elaborate treehouse blueprint that now sat taped to the fridge like a sacred document. He started reading, too, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Sci-fi mostly. Stories about distant galaxies and kids who saved the universe. Ethan caught him writing once, late at night, scribbling ideas into a worn notebook under a flashlight. He didn't interrupt. He just smiled and let him be. Jasper found his voice in quieter ways. He took to puzzles, chess, and music, often sitting by the window with headphones on, sketching shapes that made no immediate sense but always turned into something beautiful. He didn't say much, but when he did, it mattered. One day, without warning, he looked up from his drawing and said, "You don't have to keep proving you're a good dad. We already know." Ethan had to leave the room for a minute after that, just to breathe. And Leo, sweet, imaginative Leo, became the sun around which everyone else rotated. He sang in the mornings, made up games with ridiculous rules, gave nicknames to everything, including the toaster, Sir Crunch-a-Lot. He drew comic books with Ethan as the hero, a caped figure named Super Dad, who saved the day using hugs, pancakes, and super hearing. Every page was filled with love. One night, Leo fell asleep with the latest issue in his hands, and Ethan sat beside him for hours, flipping through the pages, overwhelmed by the weight of what it all meant. The rhythm of their lives became steady, filled with traditions they made up along the way. Friday night was movie night, complete with popcorn and debates over which superhero was the strongest. Saturday mornings meant pancakes, burnt or not, and Sundays were reserved for long walks through the woods behind their house, where Leo always insisted on being the trail leader. There were scraped knees, spilled milk, tantrums over bedtime, and quiet apologies whispered in the dark. But those moments were stitched together with laughter, honesty, and something Ethan had once believed he was incapable of giving: unconditional love. Outside their bubble, the world kept watching. The story of the billionaire-turned-father had gone viral months ago, but it hadn't faded. Instead, it grew. Not because Ethan fed the fire, but because people saw something in it they desperately needed to believe in: transformation. Redemption. The idea that even someone who once lived in glass towers could find his soul at ground level. Documentaries were proposed. Interviews requested. Book deals landed on his doorstep. Ethan turned most of it down. But there was one thing he said yes to: a foundation. He launched it quietly, without ceremony or press, using his own money and the tech infrastructure he'd spent a decade building. Code for Kids. A program that offered tech education, mentorship, and resources to foster children, homeless youth, and teens aging out of the system. The application portal opened online one morning with a single quote on the landing page: "Every child deserves someone who won't leave." Within weeks, thousands had applied. Ethan spent his evenings working on the foundation after the boys went to bed. It didn't feel like work. It felt like something he was meant to do. Sometimes, he'd catch himself smiling in the middle of writing code or planning a scholarship structure, and he'd realize that for the first time, he wasn't chasing success, he was planting it. One night, after a particularly long day filled with spreadsheets and bedtime stories, Ethan stood in the kitchen, watching the boys asleep on the couch, tangled in blankets and limbs. He turned off the lights, one by one, and whispered, "Thank you, into the dark. He wasn't sure who he was thanking. Maybe the universe. Maybe the broken pieces of his past that somehow led him here. Or maybe the 3 boys who gave him the one thing he thought he'd never find. A reason to stay. It was a warm September afternoon when Ethan realized he no longer measured time the way he used to. There were no quarterly deadlines, no frantic back-to-back meetings, no launch schedules pinned to the walls. The calendar on the fridge was now filled with birthday reminders, school field trips, dentist appointments, and a giant red circle around family camping weekend, which Leo had drawn himself with a marker that bled through the paper. Time, now, moved in memories rather than metrics, and that simple truth made every hour feel more alive than any year he had spent in the glass towers of the tech world. The house had changed, too. Not just in furniture or decor, but in its soul. It had been transformed from quiet and sterile to loud and beautifully chaotic. There were toys under the couch, mismatched socks in every corner, and fingerprints on every window. The walls were now covered in artwork, some framed, most taped, and the floors bore the scars of scooter wheels and running feet. Ethan didn't mind the mess. He loved it. Because it meant the boys felt safe enough to take up space. Aiden had started middle school and was taller now, with shoulders that hinted at the man he would one day become. He still watched out for his brothers, but now he also looked out for Ethan. One evening, when Ethan was late picking them up from school, Aiden climbed into the car, gave him a serious look, and said, "You okay? You've been working late again." It was gentle, but honest. Ethan had smiled, ruffled his hair, and said, "Thanks for checking on me." That's how their bond had grown, through quiet, mutual respect. Jasper had joined a local chess club and, within 2 months, was beating kids twice his age. His drawings had grown more detailed, more intricate, now pinned proudly on the kitchen corkboard. He once left a sketch on Ethan's desk, folded in half, no explanation. When Ethan opened it, it was a picture of the 4 of them, him and the boys, holding hands in front of their house. At the top, Jasper had written one word in careful, block letters, home. Leo, ever the dreamer, had started writing stories of his own, always starring a character named Captain Dad, who fought villains with kindness and pancakes. He read them aloud to Ethan at night, his voice full of excitement, stopping often to add new plot twists mid-sentence. Ethan listened to every word, always amazed by how someone so small could carry so much light inside him. Leo still called him Dad without hesitation, and every time he did, it hit Ethan like the first time all over again. They had traditions now. Saturday mornings were still for pancakes, but they had become a full ritual, Leo on fruit duty, Jasper on table setting, Aiden on quality control. They had a garden out back where each boy picked one thing to grow, tomatoes, carrots, and strawberries, and they all took it more seriously than any board meeting Ethan had ever attended. Every Friday night was movie night, with a new rule, no phones allowed. Not even Ethan's. He didn't mind. He liked being unreachable for a little while. And then there were the quiet moments. The ones no one ever talks about, but that meant everything. Like when Jasper crept into Ethan's room during a thunderstorm and curled up beside him without a word. Or when Aiden asked Ethan to come to school for Dad Day and introduce himself to the class. Or when Leo had a nightmare and whispered, "Can you stay until I fall asleep?" Ethan always stayed. Every time. Professionally, the foundation had grown beyond what he imagined. It had offices now. Staff. Volunteers. They were launching pilot programs in 3 more states and had helped over 2,000 kids in just 1 year. But Ethan never let it consume him. He worked after bedtime stories, during school hours, or in the early mornings when the house was still and peaceful. He had finally found a balance he'd once believed didn't exist. The media still tried to follow him sometimes. He didn't engage. He gave a single interview to a local journalist who had grown up in foster care. The headline read, "He didn't rescue them. They rescued each other." That was the only story Ethan felt was worth telling. One night, as fall began to roll in and the leaves turned gold and brittle, Ethan stood on the porch with a blanket around his shoulders and watched the boys through the window. They were inside, wrestling over the last cookie, laughing so hard they couldn't breathe. The house glowed with the soft, flickering light of a fireplace that barely worked but was always lit. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Cole wasn't searching for more. He had everything. Not the things he once chased, power, wealth, recognition, but the things that truly mattered. Arms that reached for him when the nightmares came. Voices that called him Dad. A home where he was needed, wanted, loved, not for what he could give, but simply because he stayed. There was a small wooden sign above the front door now, painted in uneven strokes by Leo and signed by all three boys. It read, "Built with love, not luck." Every time Ethan passed beneath it, he touched the edge without thinking, like a quiet ritual of gratitude. In the end, his greatest creation wasn't the tech empire he'd once ruled. It was a life. A real one. And in that life, surrounded by chaos and crayons and love, Ethan Cole had finally found what he didn't even know he was looking for. Peace. What makes this story unforgettable isn't that a billionaire changed the lives of three homeless boys, it's that those boys changed his. In a world obsessed with power, image, and perfection, Ethan Cole's journey reminds us that the deepest form of wealth is not measured in dollars, but in connection, vulnerability, and love that doesn't ask for anything in return. He didn't find redemption in headlines or legacy, but in bedtime stories, burnt pancakes, and three small hands reaching for his in the dark. It's a quiet kind of heroism, the kind the world doesn't always celebrate, but maybe it should. Because sometimes, the bravest thing a person can do is simply stay.